simple. If you defend your mother's right to feed her children, well, who's attacking that? Who's going up against that? Nobody is. So it's kind of lame to make a big stand against those who are, in fact, not doing anybody, not upsetting anybody. The real question, the real test of a free society, if it defends the rights of highly objectionable people, people like Nazis or Ku Klux Klan members or Holocaust deniers. Those are the people who need the protection because they are speaking stuff that hardly anybody else embraces and respects. So in order to demonstrate that the society is genuinely free, it is these objectionable people whose freedom deserves the most vigilant protection. Otherwise, what's the point of a free society if anybody who's a little bit offensive or very offensive gets excluded from it, gets shut down? It is indeed the sign of maturity of a legal order, maturity in terms of its having come to terms with the rights of individuals when it stands up for those who are most objectionable. In America, we have a famous case, and there's a movie that was made out of it, involving the publisher Larry Flint. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Larry Flint publishes this really gross magazine called Hustler. And it is if you're a woman, you can hardly stand looking at it because it's so offensive. It treats women like pieces of meat, as if they were absolutely no humanity in them. And yet, a great many people who defend individual rights and the rights of free expression defend the right of Larry Flint to publish Hustler magazine. Why? Because Hustler is a magazine. It is not a bazooka. A bazooka is something with which you go out and shoot people. A magazine is something that you present to people with the hope that they'll read it, but they don't have to read it, and they don't have to pick it up, and they don't have to buy it. So there is nothing aggressive involved in publishing a magazine, however objectionable its content may be. Now, the distinction that many of these laws that we're talking about relies on is the distinction between material that is presented to the public as a means of education and instruction versus material that is presented to the public as a means for incitement, for leading them to act hostile toward people. And we have in the United States the category now of hate crimes, where it's one thing if you just murder someone because it strikes you to be a fun thing to do. It's another thing if you murder someone because you don't like his race or color or height. Those are called hate crimes. Now, in point of fact, of course, if you murder somebody, it doesn't make any difference why the hell you murder them. They are dead. And this is the major concern about murder, not about your motivation behind the murder. I mean, you might murder them because you're jealous, or because you're envious, or because you don't like their race or their color, but the crime consists of the action of killing them without justification, that is, murdering them. And so having a hate crime ultimately amounts to punishing people's thoughts and emotions. And in a free society, a thought and emotion does not amount to an action. It is something that people have all the time. I have all kinds of thoughts that if people even knew about them, they'd probably try to put me to jail too. But, that's because thoughts are not effective means of attacking people. You can criticize people, which is very different. Criticizing people, even wrong-headedly criticizing people, may involve having certain criteria. That's what criticism relying on criteria that are false. That is, if I don't like somebody and I criticize them because of his or her race or gender or national origins, that my criteria for the criticism is misguided, it's a bad criteria, it should not be invoked by rational human beings, but it doesn't mean that it amounts to aggressing against anybody. That is the basic criteria for criminal action. Crimes in a free society amount to the violation of people's rights to their liberty, to their life, to their freedom of pursuing their own goals. And this is not attacked by materials that are written down or even depicted. I don't know if you remember recently there was this upheaval about a bunch of cartoons in German newspapers that offended Muslims because they made fun of their religious leader. And there was also the important fatwa against Salman Rushdie, because in the book Satanic Verses, he depicted a fictional story in which, again, the leader of Islam was not treated with respect. And the people in the West were outraged. Why were they outraged? Because it violated the basic precept that sticks and stones may hurt your bones, but if you are simply presenting ideas or pictures, that is not a form of aggression. You're not invading anybody's life, you're not invading anybody's property, you're not invading anybody at all by depicting them in an unfavorable light, or depicting their heroes or their icons or their gods in unfavorable lights. This is not supposed to be a crime in a free society. And so they were properly upset when, in response to the cartoons, a great many people in the Middle East burned down embassies and consulates and so on, and indeed committed crimes. In response to what? Something that was not, strictly speaking, a crime. Now, one way to defend the ways in which the response to the cartoons was to engage in what you might call cultural relativism, and start beginning to say that, well, what is okay in one country is not okay in another country because their standards of what constitutes harm or aggression is different from country to country. Well, this has a big problem. First of all, cultural relativism is itself a doctrine which, if cultural relativism were true, would itself not stand up to scrutiny. Because if cultural relativism is true, then the belief that one should honor cultural relativism is also a relativistic thought. And maybe I don't want to honor cultural relativism. Maybe I don't want to be tolerant, and maybe that is my culture. My culture doesn't believe in honoring other cultures, and that has to be accepted under cultural relativism. So ultimately, cultural relativism breaks down, especially when it comes to fundamental things. I'm not talking about cuisine, like what sort of soup is being eaten in one culture versus another, or what kind of dances people engage in, or what sort of clothes they wear. Those are pretty innocent, non-aggressive actions, and there's room for a great variety of those things, and nobody is going to be injured. However, when fundamental matters are relativized, when, for example, one argues that whether rape is okay should be a matter of what culture you are from, or whether a more realistic case perhaps is this instance of female circumcision, which is often defended on the grounds, well, in our culture versus in your culture, so don't fret about it, you know? Well, there are certain things that are due